Welcome back, my friends, to the Derate the Hate podcast. I am your host, Wilk of WilksWorld.com, and I am so incredibly grateful that you are taking the time to join me for another powerful DTH episode. Friends, at the Derate the Hate podcast, it's all about bettering the world one attitude at a time. See, we did not create the hate, but with your help, we can derate the hate. That all starts with gratitude and personal accountability. We cannot control everything that happens to us in life, but we can control how we react to it. How we act, how we react, no matter what happens to us, how we react to it makes the difference. Friends, there is only one good thing about a bad attitude, and that is that we have the ability as individuals to change it. Here on the DTH podcast, we strive to bring you great guests and provide tools to do just that. Please be sure to share it with your friends, subscribe if you haven't done so. Ratings and feedback are always greatly appreciated. And with that, let's get to this week's episode. The topics of gun control, gun safety, and gun violence prevention are an everlasting gobstopper in our news and in our lives today. And for this episode, I've invited my friends Paul Norris and Mark Beckwith back to the program to continue that discussion. And two words that keep on coming up are fear and trust. So what role does fear and trust play in the conversation about gun safety and gun violence prevention? Now, if you're not familiar with or do not remember my friends Paul Norris and Mark Beckwith, they are a couple of my great friends from Braver Angels that have joined me on the podcast before. Paul Norris is a graduate of UC Berkeley. He has a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's in counseling. A gun owner from age 12, he is an NRA benefactor member and an advocate for gun safety. Paul is currently retired, but still works part-time in counseling. He is an active member in Braver Angels, serving as a moderator and a state coordinator. Mark Beckwith is a bishop in the Episcopal Church, and he is a longtime gun violence activist and one of the co-founders of Bishops United Against Gun Violence. Mark, too, is a leader in Braver Angels who is passionate about helping people move beyond the confines of their political and religious silos in order to find a common ground. Be sure to check out our show notes for the link to Mark's recently published book, Seeing the Unseen, Beyond Prejudices, Paradigms, and Party Lines. While Mark and Paul would typically fall on opposite sides of the gun debate, they understand that just because it's a contentious topic does not mean it has to be a contentious conversation. Do not miss this great conversation with my friends Paul Norris and Mark Beckwith. Here we go. Paul Norris, Mark Beckwith, my friends, I can't tell you how much I appreciate having you back on the Derate the Hate podcast. Good to see you guys again. It's been quite some time. But it is a conversation that I wanted to have again. So welcome back to the Derate the Hate podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Wilk. Good to be here.
Indeed. I have high hopes that we will move far beyond where we did our last conversation.
Yes, I think that's true. And I think when it comes to a topic like gun control and or gun safety, gun safety advocacy, gun violence prevention, gun policy in general, there's always so much to talk about. There's a wide spectrum of things that can come into the conversation, and just having that ability to have people that can have a civil conversation and do what needs to be done to actually, maybe provide solutions, maybe show people that it doesn't have to be a toxic conversation is very important. So Mark, Paul, what I want to do today is start off first and kind of reflect on that first conversation we had back in December of 2021. So it was about 7 months ago when we had that first conversation. And that was more of a round table. Obviously, we had a few more people. We had Jim Curry. We had David Iwinski, our friend from Braver Angels. And then Randy Leoz was on there as well. And the format didn't quite work as well as I'd hoped. But we had some good things come out of it, and I just would like each of you to reflect. So I'll start off with you, Paul, if I could. Just take a quick minute to reflect on that conversation and what you thought of it, and then mention a little bit about our friend David Iwinski, whose unfortunate passing happened a couple months ago, and and that caught us all by surprise. But we do know during that first conversation that we had, he was already under the weather. He was a trooper, came and sat in on a conversation, but really wasn't up to the real David Iwinski that we all knew. So just take a few minutes real quick, Paul, and reflect on that first conversation and talk a little bit about our friend David Iwinski.
Well, doggone it, Wilk, you stole my thunder. You pretty much said a lot of what there is to be said. I reflect, and I think because of the dynamics that first time, I think it ended up being a little bit more adversarial than I hope we're going to end up being today. So that's my overall reflection. I was really saddened. I mean, David was not fully there, and I'm really sorry that I did not realize how ill he was already by the time we had that podcast. And, he passed away later. That was the last time I ever saw him. And doggone it, I just really miss him. And a lot of people in Brave Angels really do. He was truly a unique individual who brought something that I don't think anybody else in Braver Angels quite managed to do. He just had this incredible ability to really, really stand by what he believed in and yet not make it personal, So the kind of guy, with whom, you can, argue toe to toe for 2 hours and then go out and have a beer later, and just have a good time with each other. So very, very much missed, David Iwinski.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. He was a genuine and unique and just incredible individual. And I didn't know him nearly as well as you and some others in Braver Angels, but the times where I actually had an opportunity to speak with him was always a treat. Mark, why don't you reflect a little bit on our first conversation, and then maybe even talk about the Braver Angels podcast that you and I just did a month or so ago about gun policy and gun safety.
Sure. Thanks, Wilk. Reflecting back on the conversation we had several months ago, what can happen, and I think it happened with me, and I dare say it happened with all of us, as one is listening to someone presenting a different point of view, I'm not really listening, I'm fashioning my rebuttal.
Yep.
And the good news about gathering today, Paul and I have met in person before COVID, a leadership gathering on Long Island in February of 2020, I think it was. And then, Wilk, you and I have done a podcast together. Paul and I have had conversations on a podcast and in other gatherings through Braver Angels. So there is this relationship that has developed. And my hope is that we can listen at a deeper level rather than trying to just make points to counter the other person's argument.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, I can't agree more. That's one of the big problems that we find when we get together, people of differing opinions, is we often listen with an intention to reply rather than, listening to really absorb what the other person is saying. And so that's a very good point. And the fact that we have built these relationships up so far, and we've got previous interactions with each other will really help. So looking forward to the conversation, my friends. So such a good pairing between the two of you. And I'm just glad that you've joined me again here on the Derate the Hate podcast. So we'll kind of get right into the topic, talking about gun violence prevention, gun policy, how it relates to us, and how we see those issues and things that we maybe can agree upon, and things that we think might make things better for all humanity going forward. So very important topic, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Knowing what we know about each other, what would you say the values we have? We've all had these conversations together, so we know a little bit about each other. So it's kind of a great segue. What would you say the values are that we hold in common? Start with you, Mark.
I think the values that we hold in common certainly around the issue of guns, is we want to save lives and reduce violence. I think there's a common concern about that, and how we go about that. I think there's a difference of opinion about that. But to be able to say, okay, we are in the business of trying to save lives.
Yeah. And Paul?
I would add to that increase quality of life, increase safety, perceived safety as well as actual safety, to diminish fear. Mark, I don't know if I don't think we've ever actually talked about this. I actually think we have very, very similar spiritual orientations. Mm-hmm. And I base that on the title of your book, mm-hmm. Which, if you would like to plug it now, you certainly. I haven't read the book, but I will tell you that the title, really speaks to me. So I'm pretty sure the contents would as well.
Well, the title is Seeing the Unseen, Beyond Prejudices, Paradigms, and Party Lines. And a key component of the book is introducing the mandorla, which is an Italian word for almond, which is the shape that's created when you have two circles intersect. And in medieval arts, in Christian medieval art, you have lots of depictions of Jesus in the mandorla. But today, if you bring it forward, the intersection from the braver angel's perspective is between red and blue. And in our culture now, there are forces and voices on both sides to try and push people to the outer edge of their circle. And I think what Braver Angels tries to do, and certainly what I want to do, is to see if there is common ground. And it's not to pull one side to the other or not to compromise. I'm discovering, as I'm desiring to invite people into the center, I'm more fierce in my commitments to the positions that I hold, but I find that I'm less defensive and more able to listen. So that is kind of the essence of it, is this mandorla space, which is a place of transformation, a place of openness, a place of hope. And I'm passionate about seeing if I can help free other people up from the constraints of whatever political tribe or ideological tribe, or in some cases religious tribe that they are in. They can sort of confine us. The world, our experience of life is much broader than that, and we can learn from each other.
Nice. I really like that, the space of transformation, getting in there, being able to listen, being able to work with and understand, and really get an understanding of those that we may not agree with, but we can come to I think you said it very nice, Mark. You're closer to that center, and you're more fierce in your beliefs, but you have a greater willingness to listen. And I think that's so important. I think that's really good. So I like that. I like the plug you got in there for your book, Seeing the Unseen, Beyond the Prejudices, the Paradigms, and the Party Lines. Thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to checking out that Amazon. Book. Available on Amazon. Absolutely. With that said, Paul, Mark, what do we see as fundamental differences between, say, the gun rights advocate side? I know Paul is a member of the NRA. He's been around guns his whole life, as I have. He's been a gun safety instructor. And then Mark, your work after the Sandy Hook mass shooting and the things that you've done to address gun violence and issues like that. What do you see? And I'm going to start with Paul here. What do you see as the fundamental differences between those two groups? And I don't mean those fringe outside edges that get all the airplay, but really the people that fall into those groups, but they may not, like I said, they're not on that fringe outside. They have their beliefs. What would you find as our fundamental differences? Starting with you, Paul.
I think I'm in my mind, I am finding a superficial answer, and I'm finding a much, much deeper answer. The more superficial answer is, do you believe that people actually have the right to keep and bear arms for the purposes of self-defense? Also, to have people be empowered. Mao said, all power comes out of the barrel of a gun. And no matter where you go in the arguments about, could an armed citizenry overcome tyranny, there is something about gun ownership that is empowering in and of itself. That's the superficial answer. I think, the deeper answers are actually fear and trust. And I'm hoping, that perhaps that will be where we end up going later. Last night, there was a debate where Mark made this wonderful speech, where he's saying what this is really about is it's all about fear. And I agree with him about that completely. But I would also add trust. And I will just very briefly mention that maybe I'll get this in during the podcast at some point, but recent actions by our governor and our legislature in California after the Brewer decision from the Supreme Court are pretty naked violations of trust and trust destroying.
Okay. All right. And Mark, what would you say from your perspective are the fundamental differences between people on the gun violence prevention side and the gun rights activist side?
Well, I want to pick up what Paul said about fear. And I'll start with a story that comes to me from gathering a group of teenagers after the Parkland shooting in 2018 on Valentine's Day and Ash Wednesday, as it turned out. And I got these teenagers together to process what this was about. And one girl, she was a sophomore, junior in high school. She said she was walking down the hall with her friend, her best friend, and they said to each other sort of playfully, jokingly, okay, if somebody comes in, do I drape myself over you or do you drape yourself over me? And they tittered about it, they laughed about it, but at some level they were serious because they were scared. And they were scared. I think we're all scared. We're scared of COVID and climate and racial issues, economic issues, climate change, the war in Ukraine, and then since Uvalde, Buffalo, and Indianapolis, and the other shootings, Highland Park, people are more and more afraid. And so the question is, the difference is, well, how do we deal with our fear? How do we deal with our fear? And I think, as I understand it, people on the gun rights side maintain that more guns make us safer, having guns make us safer. And people on my side of this divide think, no, more guns make us more at risk. And how do we deal with fear?
Sure.
And we are afraid. And I make the case that I think that we're afraid of and in such a way that people who have guns think that if somebody's coming at them, they're going to be afraid, but they are empowered, as Paul just said, with the gun to either dismantle or remove the person who is the threat. And the thought is that takes care of the fear. And it does for a moment. I think what it does ultimately is it just exacerbates the fear. Mm-hmm. And so we have more and more fear and less trust. And so I'm thinking, and it was said last night in this debate that Braver Angels conducted, somebody mentioned that there are 400 million guns in America, and also mentioned you can't go around and just take them all away, but there was this is somebody from the gun rights side. How do we deal with all those guns? How can we make our communities safer with all those guns? Do we need them all? Do we need? Are there some that people shouldn't have? Are there some people who shouldn't have guns? And can we work together to make it safer and acknowledge that? In this country, from the beginning, guns have been part of people's lives. Mm-hmm. Haven't been a part of my life, but as you both said, had been part of your lives. And that needs to be honored, that needs to be respected, and needs to be dealt with. So how do we manage this?
So, Paul, one of the things that keeps on coming up in these conversations, and it came up in our first conversation back in December, it came up in the podcast that Mark and I did with Kieran, is that word fear. And I look at the word fear, and I know it was brought up by our friend David Iwinski in the December conversation. Like he said, and I've even said plenty of times in public forums, I don't carry a gun out of fear. I don't own my guns out of fear. I know, I believe you even said something about fear in that first conversation, Paul. Talk to me about the word fear and how you see fear specifically in this conversation. Because it is a very legitimate thing that Mark is saying. There are a lot of people that have this genuine fear of firearms, and with fear, fear breeds ignorance. Ignorance breeds fear. It's a double-edged sword there. But then they all oftentimes fear leads to anger and hate and then more things. So, Paul, tell me how you see the word fear and how it plays into the overall conversation on guns, gun policy, and the like.
Yeah. Well, this is really interesting. We're going in directions, substantially different from the typical iconic conversation about this. And I will call that a good thing. I mean, a couple of things come to mind, pretty much immediately. People are not particularly rational in what they're afraid of. I definitely, get that kids have fear of school shootings. I heard of somebody not so long ago who had the opportunity to be an exchange student from Mexico into the United States and decided not to do it because she was afraid of school shootings, which is kind of ironic because the murder rate in Mexico is just out of sight.
Oh, it's outrageous. It's outrageous.
But I mean, so people have this enormous fear about something that is an incredibly rare event, but it looms large in their mind. And why does it loom so large in their mind? It's because it is something that when it happens, it is played up in the news. It is, we have a culture that glamorizes violence. The media glamorizes violence. School shootings sell newspapers depicting people using machine guns on each other. Is standard fare in Hollywood. So much easier to do than to actually create a plot that's meaningful. So this culture of violence, and you think about it, if you're somebody, and I'm not necessarily going to say insane, but somebody who just kind of like has self-hate and just can't find any real meaning in life, you want to do something where everybody's going to know your name. School shooting. And it's going to be glamorized because everybody's going to know your name. So that, that contributes to a culture of fear. But again, the thing that is far more likely to happen is, you're far more likely to have somebody break into your home. There aren't a whole lot of home invasion robberies in the United States. They're much more common in places like England because it's risky to do home invasion robberies in the United States.
Very.
It's risky because people have guns for self-defense. So, I mean, I feel like I'm kind of rambling here.
Oh, and that's all right, because I think you made a very good point, Paul, and it's something that I want to get to. It's a nice segue into
well, let me just add one more thing, if I could.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Paul. Yeah.
One of the ways that is so different, I think, and I will say this, between Mark and myself, but also just kind of in general, is when somebody does a bad thing with a gun, my focus is to look at the person. And what can we do about the person that got the person to do something like that? And I think on the other side, they tend to look more at the gun. So that is a significant difference.
There is a significant difference there, and it's something that I've mentioned plenty of times. And, in that conversation that Mark and I had on the Braver Angels podcast with Kieran, I talked about a couple of those things. I think the gun in a lot of ways is just a byproduct in that violence conversation. But again, like I've said on the podcast several times, is the hateful rhetoric sells soap. The media sensationalizes, they sensationalize the violence. They use the gun, and the gun becomes kind of a byproduct. And Mark can talk a little bit about this after I bring up, you talked about how guns are used in defensive gun uses. You didn't say the word, but I will. Because how it's risky to invade a home, invade an occupied dwelling in the United States. So actions like that are far less prevalent in the United States than other countries where people are not able to defend themselves with guns. And I think this is a misconception between people on the gun violence prevention side and the gun advocacy side, is the number of times that guns are used in this country for defensive purposes. And I think this is part of that divide. And it's one that I would love to clear up, because it's something that I mentioned in that conversation with Mark. It's something that I've mentioned in conversations with others, and it's dismissed as almost insignificant. But the stats, which I don't want to get into a bunch of stats in this episode, but the stats actually prove, and I misstated it in that conversation, but the stats actually prove, and it's been done by people on both sides, that defensive gun uses in this country, the number of defensive gun uses far outweigh the number of people that are actually murdered with guns, or the number of times that there are homicides committed in this country with guns. So I don't want to dismiss the significance of that in the conversation. So going to Mark's point earlier, how do we square the fact that there are 400 million guns in this country? How do we make people feel safe and help to eliminate that fear? And how do we also square that with the fact that so many of those guns, number one, will never do any harm to anybody because it's the person, not the gun. But most of those guns are owned by people like you and I, Paul, who have a very, very strong sense of gun safety, and we would never use our gun in a way that would hurt or harm anybody that was not trying to hurt or harm us. So Mark, go ahead and take a quick minute or two to respond to that.
And I don't want to get into the statistics that you cited about America being safer in terms of home invasion because people are armed. But what I want to focus on is a guy I've worked with who is a gun trainer talks about a self-defense plan. And a self-defense plan that one would have in a home assumes, at least to me, that we're protecting ourselves from an intruder. So inherent in that statement is a level of fear. We fear that somebody may come into our house and threaten us, rob us, harm us, kill us. So there is that fear. And I would also submit that all of us, either at the kitchen table or on the playground, were taught to be afraid of someone or a certain kind of person, and to either be afraid of them or to put them down, which then leads to a level of fear. And I would submit, and I will hold to this, we all learned that. We all learned that. If you think that we didn't learn it, we need to think again. We learned it either in our religious community, at the kitchen table, at school, on the playground. We learned it somewhere. And we have absorbed that, all of us, to some to greater degrees, some to other degrees. I've learned a level of prejudice from a very early age. I'd like to say that I've gotten rid of it. I haven't. I've learned to manage it. Okay. That it deals with the fear. I think guns is not the best way to deal with that fear. As I mentioned last night, I consider guns to be fear transfer machines, that the fear that one might feel from an intruder is then thwarted by the gun who cuts down the intruder, taking away the fear for the moment. It doesn't solve the fear. And my concern about people who want to continue to arm themselves is that will reduce the fear. I think it just exacerbates it. It certainly exacerbates it in me.
Okay, point taken.
Ken, let me weigh in.
Yeah.
Mark, I really find, there's a lot that I agree with you on. I mean, we're in somewhat similar professions. I counsel people, and a lot of what I counsel people about are their fears. And fears are sometimes actually quite rational, but probably, for most of us, a lot of the time, they're actually not rational. They are, as you have said, not your word, but inculcated, programmed into us. And I mean, this is my work. This is my work in counseling with people. And as far as, the gun being a fear transfer machine, there's a certain accuracy in that. And does it solve the societal problems? I mean, I would love to live in a society where I didn't feel like I needed a gun. I would love that. I don't live in that society. I live in San Francisco, which has experimented with a new kind of criminal justice system where we have people who repeat crimes over and over and over again and are released. I even had a conversation. Well, no, I guess it's probably not fair for me to drop that person's name, but somebody who is a very prominent Blue and Braver Angels who talked to me about, in his work with police. Police would sometimes say, yeah, sometimes we arrest somebody and they tell us, you know what, why are you arresting me? I'm going to be out of jail before you finish your shift. And in fact, that turns out to be true. So self-protection, but it's not like I want somebody to be afraid of me. The ideal circumstance of self-defense is that either somebody just knows I have a gun and they don't try anything, or they find out that I have a gun and they decide that I am no longer an easy victim. And the thing about that is invisible. So I don't really particularly like throwing stats around, but I do like to point out that misuse of a gun is very, very visible because either there's a horrible injury or there's a dead body. Mm-hmm. Very visible. Proper use of a gun is invisible. If somebody, if like say I'm on the street and I'm carrying a gun, and as I have experienced, I suddenly find myself surrounded by three muggers. I get out the gun and I display it, and they decide to leave me alone. Am I going to report that? No, I'm not going to report it. It's invisible.
And oftentimes those things go unreported because people are afraid that they're going to get in trouble, and that's a legitimate fear in the society we live in today.
Yeah, I mean, there are cases, in California, for example, if you had a legitimate use of self-defense, there's a good chance that those three muggers would go and report you to the police. I mean, this has happened.
Yeah. Yep.
It has happened. So, let's look at this a little bit deeper, Mark, this thing about fear. And again, it is not my intention to walk around making people afraid of me. It is my intention to have the effective ability to protect myself, by the way, as a 75-year-old man who is now seen as easy prey, which was not the case when I was a youth.
Yeah, no, those things are very valid. Both points are valid on both sides, and I appreciate you both making them. All right, so let's move our conversation into kind of a solutions phase. I'd like to get both of your inputs on how each of your positions proposes to reduce violence. Paul, let's start with you.
So reducing violence, and I'm glad, you put that as reducing violence overall. And, again, I find, there are a whole bunch of pat answers that I could give, but this is a devilishly difficult problem in our country, as divided as we are. And again, I go back to trust. I can't see how I can make a deal with, say, somebody like Gavin Newsom. I don't think I can make a deal. I'm thinking of the Ukraine. The Ukraine, I don't know if people remember this. The Ukraine gave up nuclear weapons based on a promise that they would never be invaded by Russia. And so, this is the level of trust that I feel. I feel zero.
Mhm.
Would I trust Mark? If Mark were in charge, would I make a deal with Mark? Yeah, I'd love to. But Mark's not in charge. So let me just tell you a couple of things. The state of California, right after Brewer, the Attorney General has a website, and they posted downloadable information about gun owners in California, including a complete list of all the CCW holders, which included their addresses. So this was publicly available for download. And that included people like, women who had restraining orders. It included judges, just a horrible violation. So anyway, okay, so the Attorney General's website, posted this. And there were other things, that were up as well, but, not quite as easy to identify the people. A horrible violation of trust. And, at first I thought, well, this was like some, techie who worked for the state of California who decided to do this. But I don't know, with the reaction of the Attorney General since, I believe that he may have actually deliberately had that done. Or, there was an emergency legislation passed that for emergency taking effect immediately that forbade all marketing of firearms or firearms training or even firearms safety to children. And children, what does that mean? That means under 21. Yeah, an incredible violation of the First Amendment. And they passed it as an emergency measure.
Yeah.
Effective immediately. I mean, it's clearly thumbing their nose at the Supreme Court. So with things like that, how can I give ground and how can I trust? I think this is the key issue. This is not the question you asked me. How do we move forward? Well, I guess it is the answer. So we cannot move forward until we have some kind of trust where people will make agreements that are binding agreements. And it's not just the next step towards the next round of negotiations and loss of rights.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a very valid concern. I think you make some very good points there, Paul, that trust factor between the individual and the government has to be there if there's any ground for us to move forward with that. And I do agree with you there. Now, Mark, how would you propose? What would be your proposal to try and reduce violence when it comes to the gun conversation?
Yeah, and I want to respond to the issue of trust, and then I will speak to your question directly, Wilk, because it seems to me as I listen to you, Paul, and to you, Wilk, when you're out and about and you are armed, concealed carry, have a permit, all the rest of it, it seems to me that, as you said earlier, Paul, that you're easy prey for someone. That suggests to me that you are protecting yourself, not trusting who you're going to come in contact with. And I think that just reinforces the lack of trust in our communities. If we go out thinking, I need a gun because I'm not going to trust the person who's coming, walking up along the other way along the street, that just exacerbates the issue of mistrust, it seems to me. And is there a way to get at that? And I think there is a way to get at that. And it's been moving forward across the country. I'm part of the New Hampshire Firearms Safety Coalition, which is the first one in the country where people in the mental health community and gun shop owners were working together to reduce the incidence of suicide. More than half of gun deaths are by suicide with guns. Gun suicides are the most, I hate to use the term, effective form of suicide, as opposed to drugs or whatever. And people on both sides were saying, we need to reduce the level of suicide. And the way they've done that and been effective is to get gun shop owners, and there have been several around the country, who say, hey, look, if you're really feeling at wit's end, and I'm thinking of a video that I saw of a gun shop owner who very vulnerably said, I was in a very, very bad place, and a friend of mine came and said, can I take your gun for a period of time? And the gun owner said, he saved my life. That is the solution. And again, 25,000 deaths are by gun suicide a year. And I think that's something that we can work at. Extreme risk protection orders are designed to do that. I want to talk about somebody I knew in Washington State whose husband committed suicide with a firearm, and she started a movement. And she said they had some legislation in Washington State, and they engaged somebody who was a senior member of the NRA, who was incredibly helpful at reframing the legislation that made more sense and was more appealing to everyone. That person's no longer with the NRA, but she said that there was somebody on the other side who one would think would be diametrically opposed to all of this, who is a part of this. So I think that is an arena where we can really make an impact. And the New Hampshire Firearm Safety Coalition has been replicated in 10, 15 states around the country. Again, gun shop owners, gun rights owners, and mental health people on the gun violence prevention side working together to see if we can reduce this level of suicide. And the VA has gotten involved too, because as we know, that's a significant problem among veterans.
It certainly is. Suicide is a terrible epidemic now amongst veterans, combat veterans coming back from overseas, and the things that they've seen, and their inability to get the help that they need for their PTSD and things like that. There's no denying the fact that some of those people that are suffering from some severe mental illness, PTSD and the like, if they do readily have access to a firearm, and there's no way also to deny the fact that guns, in most cases, an attempted suicide with the gun is a successful suicide. That was a bad way to say it, because attempted and
no, there's not a good way to say it. And what I'm learning is the impulse to commit suicide is often just an impulse. It's very rarely planned out. And rarely do people then think about, if they're unsuccessful, of trying it again. It's not to say it doesn't happen, but the incidence goes way, way down if somebody is able to be talked out of suicide.
So can I respond?
So go ahead, Paul. Go ahead and respond to that.
Yeah, well, the first thing, I want to talk about the experience of concealed carry, which I don't have that in California, but I had a trip that I went on with my best friend, where I did have the experience of concealed carry. And, the experience is not what I think people on the other side imagine, that you're walking around and feeling more powerful than the people around you, and continually looking for danger and continually thinking about the gun. It's actually more like fire insurance in my experience. After a while, you just forget it. You forget that you have it unless a situation arises in which you need it. And that is the experience of concealed carry. It's, I didn't feel like I was understood when you said, it's like about not trusting the people we encounter. It's, again, more like fire insurance. It's more like the outlier. It's more like the experience that happens sometimes. It's not the experience that we happen all the time. I walk down the street, I'm smiling at people. I'm one of the few old white guys who will actually smile at people and think, hey, maybe somebody will smile back at me. It happens sometimes. So again, it's there if needed, and the likelihood that it's going to be needed is not high. But if it is needed, the importance is very high.
And the analogy I like to use, Paul, and not to interrupt, but the analogy that I like to use, because I've been in the transportation industry, and more specifically the propane transportation industry, for the majority of my adult life. And all the years that I was driving the trucks hauling propane, I always had to have a fire extinguisher on board that truck. Now, my hopes is that I never have to use that fire extinguisher. I don't think about that fire extinguisher, but I know where it is. I know how to use it. And if it's needed, I better be prepared to use it. So that's the analogy that I like to use. I don't feel more empowered by it. And I think, and that's why I said it earlier, I think there are so many misconceptions between the people on different sides of this topic, but it's so important to have this conversation and these kind of conversations, because these kind of conversations really give people on both sides of the issue information, but it also shows them that it doesn't have to be a combative, a very tense and a very negative experience to have the conversation. It helps to eliminate that ignorance. It helps to ease the minds of those whom with which we disagree, because they can see that there are different sides of the issue, but it doesn't have to be a contentious issue.
One thing that I hope the two of you will agree with me on. A couple of years ago, I took a gun course, a gun safety course, which was the prerequisite to getting a gun permit in Massachusetts, where I was living at the time. And the instructor, who was a retired police officer, had us come up and pick up a facsimile, same size and heft of a gun. And there were 16 of us in the class. And he said, after all of us came up and held it and pointed it, he said, half of you would have shot me in the stomach because you picked it up wrong and you put your finger on the trigger, and I'm going to teach you how to do it properly. And he proceeded to do that. But I need to say, and he had us shoot a couple of rounds down in the firing range. And after that course, it was 3-4 hours long, I then was given the permission to buy a gun and have it in Massachusetts. I thought, me? You kidding? I still didn't know how to hold it properly. And there are all sorts of people out there who have even less training than I do, because the guy said, in most of the communities in Massachusetts, you don't need to fire the gun to get a permit. You just need to take the class. And I started to pull my hair out because oh my God, I had no skill or facility. I listen to two of you and I trust that you have that facility. You know how to use a gun, how to store it, how to, take the safety off, all of that sort of stuff. But I shudder to think of the number of people who think, oh, I've got a gun, I'm safe now, but they'd shoot a plane out of the sky before they were able to shoot somebody or a target that they were aiming at.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, I want to empathize with you on something. I suspect you may be feeling outnumbered here. And, so I just want to address that. This is kind of a 2-on-1. And, I just want to acknowledge that. And, I hope.
Appreciate that. I don't particularly feel that because I know that both of you and I feel a level of trust with the both of you. So.
And just for the record, I am keeping my opinions at bay as best I can in this conversation, because there's so much I would like to say, but I'm not. This conversation is for the two of you. It is really meant to show people that another civil conversation can be had on a very contentious topic. So
let me get to some of the things I agree with you on. So it's actually part of my job, suicide assessment and suicide prevention. And, if it came down to it, I have not had the experience of somebody who I thought was suicidal and owned firearms. But if that happened, it would be my responsibility to find some way to make that person safe, whether it was giving the firearms to somebody else for a period of time or whatever. It could even involve, going to the police. God forbid I would ever have to do that to a client, but it could happen. So, suicide is a complex topic. And, for example, one thing people often, I've literally heard people say, I heard it last night. Somebody said, I understand that I'm more likely to be killed by my own gun than I will kill somebody else. Well, that's a misuse of statistics. Basically, you either are going to kill yourself with your gun or you are not going to kill yourself with your gun. And I feel quite confident that I will never kill myself with my gun, because even if I wanted into my life, I wouldn't do it with a gun because I wouldn't want to become one of the statistics for the other side.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And we're learning things about suicide. As part of my training, ongoing training, I learned some things that were very, very different from what I was originally taught. And it totally echoes what you said about the impulsive factor in suicide, that people do it as an impulse. But again, this is not universally true.
Sure.
Not universally true. And I'm not really sure that anybody has good stats about, how many people there are who think about it for a very, very long time, or people who just, have an impulsive moment and do it. But we know that the impulse is a big factor, so I'm with you on that. If somebody is in a state of deep depression and impulsivity is something to look at, and I want to protect people from their own guns if they need it, if they are somebody who is at risk. Totally agree with you on that. And I guess, and you talked about gun safety. I think you will find that both Wilk and I are fanatics on gun safety and could quote you the 3 rules of gun safety. Even if, you woke us up in the middle of the night and said, okay, tell me the 3 rules of gun safety right now. I bet you we could both do it.
I would think so.
So, I totally agree with that. I don't actually agree with the way that guy taught you, because as a firearms instructor, I don't believe in humiliating people as a form of teaching them. So I wouldn't use that tactic.
Well, it was very effective, I thought, and it just gave me an appreciation of how, I can't say complex, but it requires more than a morning training session to adequately be able to use a gun, a firearm. And so I just, I think that's really, really important.
I don't see this as quite the same way you do. And again, I'm back to trust.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that this is another, a firearms training requirement can be used as a way to prevent people from being able to defend themselves. So for me, this is complex, and I have very, very mixed feelings about it. I will tell you myself, I have extensive training in firearms, including, training from recon Marines, that included speed reloading drills and all kinds of things like that. And by the way, when I had that kind of training, there was one rule, or there were a bunch of rules, but one rule that was stated at the very beginning is if anybody there is no such thing as an accidental discharge. If your gun goes off and it was not aimed properly and it was not during a time when you were supposed to be shooting, you are out of this course. No refund. You never come back again. You never get another chance at this institute. So that was the level of seriousness about gun safety in that training. But again, I have mixed feelings because, again, it's trust.
Sure.
Anything else, it can be misused to prevent people from being able to get a gun to defend themselves.
Yes.
What I'm hearing from both of you, and I've again, these conversations that we've had together are so important, but there's so much more. It's such a complex topic. There's so many things and so many different tributaries that this could take, because it's not just something that can be fully discussed and fully hashed out in a 1-hour conversation. But the important thing that I want everybody that's listening here on the Derate the Hate podcast to understand, and those that have listened to previous episodes when we've had conversations with Paul and Mark and our other friends, is these conversations are the important piece. Each one of those little tributaries can have its own, little dynamic aspects to them, But the conversation is what really needs to be had. The conversation is what's going to help eliminate some of that fear that Mark was talking about, help increase some of that trust that Paul was talking about. The conversation itself is the important part, because there's so many different things and so many different ways these conversations can be had. But education and civility and just a sense of unity and being able to come together, maybe not necessarily agreeing with the person on the other side of the aisle or the other side of the topic, but understanding the humanity in that person that you're having that conversation with, understanding that they don't have ill will or bad intentions. We just grew up different. We see things different ways. But in just like we talked about in the very beginning of this conversation, what values do we have? We all agree that safety is paramount. Safety is key. So let's wrap up this conversation, my friends. It's been a great conversation. There's a lot more that could have been said again, but for the sake of time, let's go ahead and wrap up. Tell me your final thoughts, Mark. Tell me what you thought of our conversation here, and how do you feel about things?
Well, I need to start with you, Wilk, and your gracious hospitality. You frame this in a way that makes it possible to talk about these difficult issues. So I really want to thank you for that, and to thank Paul. He and I have known each other now over the course of our Braver Angels connections, and I just really appreciate it. And I learn more each time, and I'm grateful for that. So your intent of doing this, Wilk, has succeeded, at least with me. So I'm grateful for that.
Very good. I do appreciate it, and thank you for the kind words, Mark. Now, Paul, what are you taking away? How do you feel about our conversation here today?
Yeah, well, of course, very similar to what Mark said. But I do want to specifically give Mark credit because I feel like when I talk to you, the conversation moves. Doesn't get stuck in the same old grooves over and over and over again. But we actually get into some new territory. And for that, sir, I take my hat off to you.
Thank you.
And my hat goes off to both of you. What a great conversation between two guys that are clearly on opposite sides of the debate. And yes, as Paul said, it could have been another snooze fest, but these are two guys who are really looking for solutions, really looking to hammer out the details, finding common ground, and showing once again that just because it's a contentious topic doesn't mean it has to be a contentious conversation. We can move forward having civil conversations about complex and complicated topics without getting upset at the other party. It's been proven time and time again, and that's the only way that we're going to get past the issues that we face as a country. Friends, if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. Share it with your friends, share it far and wide. And of course, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe right from our website so you can get the Derate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. So this is Wilk wrapping up for the week saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything that you've got, and remember it's up to you to make each and every day the day that you want it to be. If there is something that you would like to share with me, you can catch me on most social media platforms, or you can email me directly, wilk@wilksworld.com. With that, my friends, I am going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.